Hello and welcome to the Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Greenspring Center for Lifelong Learning. Please subscribe to our podcast so that we can continue to support your important work. As Dr. Montessori said, an education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. We agree. So let's get to work. I'm Tamara Sheasley-Ballas, and in today's episode, we're talking about building relationships with parents and caregivers at the 0 to 3 levels, and how guides are really the tone setters for these families all the way through their Montessori experience. My guest today is Uniit Carruyo. Uniit is an artist, author, and educator with over 25 years of experience with children ages 0 to 6. She is a Montessori teacher trainer and has taught Montessorians nationally and internationally. Uniit holds an MS ED in leadership from Bank Street College of Education, a BS in psychology, and an AMS 0 to 3 credential from CMTE. She is our mentor for our toddler mentoring community and founded and directs Flaming Imagination, a professional development approach for educators and caregivers. Welcome, Uniit. So we're so excited to have you back on today, Uniit. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Oh, it's our pleasure. I learned so much from you last time. I can't wait to hear how the conversation goes today.
Me,
Let's dig right in. Like, we are talking about building relationships with families. That's such a cornerstone of the child's experience, the family's experience, and the guide's experience as well. So let's start out by talking about what you do to help build a healthy and open relationship with families as they're coming into your infant classroom or your toddler classroom, or really any classroom, but especially for those little ones who the families, this is their most precious being in the world, and most of them are, they're coming to you. They haven't been anywhere else. Many of the children have stayed home, and they're giving you this precious being. And how do you hold that? How do you create that as a safe and really meaningful relationship?
well, I really appreciate the word that you use, precious, because I think that is really the right word when we're talking about welcoming a new family into a program through an infant or toddler program. And I think that there's this incredible responsibility that 0 to 3 guides have that goes so far outside the realm of their job description on the page. And one of them being this incredible tone setter for the child's experience in Montessori. And that when you have a infant toddler program, that Montessori guide phasing in a new family is basically setting up the tone for the way that that family sees Montessori. That's why I feel like it's so important for infant toddler guides to have a fluency in the philosophy, to be able to talk really clearly and simply to new families about what Montessori is and what the pedagogy is and why it's all aligned so well with child development. And so when we kind of are able to do that, when we're able to meet this new family and set the bar, and it's a high bar, for Montessori, it's a high bar, and setting the bar there and then delivering it, it's kind of when the family falls in love with Montessori. So it's really an additional layer of responsibility that 0 to 3 guides have.
Mm. Okay, there's so much in there that I wanna to talk about, but I love the concept of a tone setter, and I also love the idea of setting the bar. So let's start there. Let's start with, what does it mean to set the bar with your families?
Well, I think that it's a combination of things because, we have a philosophy. So there are all of these sort of philosophical tenets that we're weaving into the work that we do with families. And one of them is community. and what it means to be a healthy individual in an interconnected, functioning community. And so I think that when we're able to really nail that, we're modeling it in all of these levels. So we're modeling it in the children's environment. We're modeling it with our team and the way our team communicates it. And we're modeling it in this other like family community that we have this really beautiful opportunity at the 0 to 3 level to create community amongst the families. So if a family's coming in with one child and it's their first child, especially because once you start to have more children, you get more confident about it and it's not as scary and intimidating. So especially when there's a family that's coming in with their first child, and like you said, this is just the most precious being. And most of the time parents don't have parent training, so they're coming in with their child and feeling like, all right, I made a choice, I chose your program, now what? And they're really looking to the guide to help you know to help shepherd them through that transition, and it's really a holistic experience. So when you're a 0 to 3 guide, it's never just the child, it's always the whole family, and understanding the family culture, and then hopefully creating a new community of the families within the community of children that will last maybe a whole lifetime if we're lucky.
Mm, mm, mm. Okay, so I I feel like there's so many ways we could go here, but let's talk about, first of all, when you say shepherding in families, brass tacks, what does
Mhm.
that mean? What are you really thinking about? What are you doing? What does that look like before school starts? Are there conversations you're having with the family before the children begin? Can you help us understand, kind of give us a map, roadmap of what that looks like in a well-run, healthy school community?
Yeah. Brass tacks, there is a heavy investment in the relationship before the first day of school for a child. And so that, to me, even though it means a lot more coordination and scheduling and thinking about something before you even are in the room with children, it is going to pay dividends throughout the year because you've invested in the relationship. So there are lots of ways, and to be multimodal is to be culturally sensitive, because depending on your community, every family represents a different culture. Every family represents a different family culture. And so as a guide, when I'm welcoming a new group of children in, I want to make contact with every family individually on multiple levels. So I want to do a home visit for this family. And this is something I know that things got skewed during the pandemic. And not only did we get skewed in our systems and routines, now as we're on this sort of new phase of what the pandemic means for us, there's just so much more anxiety in families and children and teachers. So that's something that we kind of have to factor in. But I think that the response is relationship building. And so a home visit and making sure that the home visit is really, really comfortable for the family, because it can be intimidating to have someone come into your home if you're not sure why they're coming, and really sending the message ahead of time. We want to see where your child eats, sleeps, and plays. That's it. We want to know what a regular day is like for this child so we can then build a better environment for them when they're in our care. And so really understanding the routines that a child has in the home, if there's pets in the home, if there's, multi-generations in the home, every little bit of information we gain on a home visit helps us to then adjust the learning environment to make it feel more home. We're trying to create a home away from home in our infant toddler environments. We want it to feel really cozy and welcoming. And so that starts with figuring out what their actual home looks like. And then we'll sort of go from there. But when I say multimodal, I mean things like written communication too. If, let's say, language isn't a strength, or English is a new language for a family, or there just isn't confidence in making sure that you get the nuance of communication. Or maybe a family's really busy and they need to be able to go back and read the email, as opposed to having, having the capacity to schedule something in real time. So making sure that you've written careful surveys to a new family to find out what is the primary language spoken in the home, who's in the home, what are the values of the family, what are the treasured routines and celebrations in the family. So this is all about investigating the culture of the family so you can then respond to it in a sensitive way, the environment.
Oh, that's so beautiful, right? It really holds the family as a unit, and you're not just holding the child, you're really saying this is a partnership and we want to know you. What happens when you walk into a home and it's the absolute opposite of everything we do and everything we teach, and you see that the child doesn't have any independence, or all of those pieces? They're watching an iPad at breakfast, right? Those kind of pieces. How do you navigate then that conversation?
Well, you think about it. When I think about, let's say, Dr. Montessori and the way that she observed children, and the idea was to have as objective a lens as you possibly can. You're approaching it as a scientist. So it's not about making a judgment on what the family's routines are, or what sort of the child's day in the life is. It's just getting information. And so I would look at it as just that information. Okay, this is not something, and I would have no expectation that a family would be integrating Montessori in their home when they're first starting. I find that it's a long game, and that what the idea is, no problem if they're not doing Montessori in the home. Why would they be? They're new to this philosophy. But what I think is true is that over time, when they see the impact of this philosophy and the independence and all these things on their child, they are going to be compelled and excited to try and integrate some of those things into their home environment. So for me, no problem if they're not, if it's not an apparent thing. And also, children are really quite skilled at sort of a geographical code switching. So a child can go into the school and enter in and know the familiar routines and know what the expectations are set by the team of teachers, and know that at home it's done differently. And it's also, I think, another layer of really an important thing for the adult guide to be checking their bias. And so to be noticing, oh, I did feel some judgment when I saw, this thing in the home. We're not going to be successful if we're judging the families. It's not about that. It's about trying to create the best environment in the school that we can, and supporting the child in the best way that we can.
I think that's so important to underscore. I felt judgment even as I said it. And so, is there a time where you might talk about those things if the child is struggling in the Montessori environment? Does it become, or do you always, is what you've seen in the home held kind of sacred so that there's a safety about the visit? Or do you say, because let's say Joey's having trouble when he comes to school and he's spinning, and you're 6 weeks in and he's not able to regulate, and that he's watching TV, he's watching the screen at breakfast and then he's watching it in the car ride. I, I really, my question is, I would step into that conversation. I'm wondering what
Mhm.
your take on that is.
Well, I think it depends, with any kind of question about any theoretical question about what ifs with a child. I think it depends. It depends on a lot of factors that maybe this is part of what having an individualized sort of approach to being with children means to me, is that there isn't a black and white answer on what to do in any given situation. And what it is about is trying to be as sensitive as possible to each child as they come across your path. And I do think that there's a certain amount of information that experience being a teacher can give you. Oh, yes, I've seen this before, and this is how I handled it last time. But the thing is, I guess first and foremost for me is understanding what we have control over. We don't have control over what is going on for a child in their home. And I'm not talking about the extreme situations where there's violence and trauma. That's not what I'm talking about, because obviously then you would need other supports. That's not something that a Montessori guide is qualified to navigate. But if we're talking about sort of typical, scenarios, the continuum of typical experiences, I think that teachers set themselves up for frustration when they feel compelled to control what's happening in the home. And I think that you can generally get further by inspiring a family, by showing them what's possible. And so again, that means being patient with the relationship. And so, for example, concretely, I know that having parents or guardians in the children's environment is not something everybody's comfortable with. For me, I welcome that under very specific conditions. And so, for example, if I'm phasing in a family, and I remember having a family come in, and I was mostly having conversations with the mother, and it was her oldest child. I think, no, she only had one child, it was her only child, and she had just moved to the area. There was a lot of things going on for her that I could have compassion for, that I understood that it was a difficult transition for her. And so I said, she said, "What if I hate it? What if I hate your program?" And I said, "Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Let's see what we can do. And we're going to keep having a conversation. And what I would like for you to do is come in with your child." And I set up an adult-sized chair for her. So she would come in, long past the sort of traditional week of phase-in, which I would do for any family. She came in and I said, "Here's how it's going to go. Bring a book, bring something to read or look at. But the idea is I want to be able to develop a relationship with your child. And so what I'm asking you to do is come be present, but try to fade into the background. Think of it as a fly on the wall kind of a thing." And so she agreed to that. And so I set up the chair for her, and she would bring her book, and the two of them would come to school together, and she would sit in the chair, and I would help him get settled and hang his coat and all the things that you do with a toddler coming into the room. And she just became a fixture in the room for a while. I want to say she was coming in for over a month, and she was just part of the room at that point. And she was very respectful of what I had asked of her. And the thing that was happening in those weeks is she was watching me. She was watching my team meet her child with warmth and sensitivity and compassion, and that's what she needed to see in order to trust the experience. And I'll never forget the day that they came to the door. And the way that I greet toddlers is I have, the door is closed. There's a little knocker, it was a little lion knocker at a child's height. And the child, when they're ready, would knock on the door. And I open the door. I'm sitting on my little stool. And so the first thing they see when they come to school is my smiling face, just delighted to see them, or, a team member's smiling face, delighted to see them. And so I opened the door, and as usual, they arrived together, but she stays outside the door. And I said, "Oh, you're not going to come in?" She said, "No." Okay. So the child came in, she left, and she was fine. She was happy. And again, there's so many stories in my mind like this where I almost welcome the challenge of a family that doesn't believe it's going to work, because I just say, "Okay, let's see what happens. You're going to find out. It's really awesome." And I don't mind taking my time to win them over. So I think that's a little bit of the concrete advice I would give an infant toddler guide is be patient, trust yourself, trust the process, and know that you'll win them over eventually.
I love that story. And were you concerned that when the mom left, the child would struggle because all of a sudden she'd been such a fixture? And so can you talk about that a little?
Not at all, because I think that's what happens. That happens a lot where it's the child is fine. The child, and I think any 0 to 3 guide is going to recognize this and be nodding right now as they're listening, that, a lot of times the child is fine, and it's the parent or the guardian that needs more help in order to get to that place of confidence and trust in you, and that sometimes you have to do that in order to create the space where the child can walk in confidently. This child was fine, early on, but because the mom wasn't, then we weren't done yet. We weren't done with phase in yet.
Well, that's so interesting, and really considering the family, the caregiver, when you're considering your phase-in. I do wanna talk about phase-in, but I wanna ask then, I think some toddler or infant guides may say that they're nervous to have another adult watching them like that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, and I think that's a very common feeling, especially, I mean, I'll be 48 in June, so I've been doing this a little while, but I started working in nursery schools when I was 17. And so I know very well the feeling of I'm in charge of this group of children, and I'm supposed to be the expert on, early childhood, but I'm a kid, and this is like a grown-up parent, and how am I supposed to tell them anything? And this continued, I felt this in my 20s too, and honestly, I think there was a shift for me when I had my own child, and that's not for everyone. Not everyone's going to have their own children. There's beautiful teachers who don't have children and love deeply the children that are in their care. So that's not, you don't have to do that in order to get it, but that's what happened for me, where I started to trust my own expertise. And so that's probably going to look different for everybody, whether it's a credential or a training or a degree or just some years under your belt, where you start to feel, oh, well, I am the expert on what happens in this room, and I understand children on a really deep level. And so I think that with the observation piece, something that comes to mind is sort of normalizing being observed. We're in a field. Observation is one of the theoretical foundations of what we do, observation. And so that's a two-way thing. We can't just say we're going to observe, but we don't want to be observed. We have to get comfortable with being observed, because that's how we're also going to get feedback, having someone come and that's another thing that you can do to make that work for you. So when I have, parents or guardians come into my children's environment, I give them a form and a clipboard. And the form is, I've made the form and it's a guided observation. And I tell them, you know, I'd like to hear your feedback about what you're seeing. They know from the get-go that I'm keeping that piece of paper, that it's to help them see some of the things in the philosophy when they're in the room. And also, it's kind of a beautiful thing to have the space to watch your child, and you don't have to feel responsible for managing their movement or their social interactions. And it's a gift that we can give parents to say, all right, take a load off. You're going to sit here. You're going to be comfy. Let me handle it. And all you have to do is watch. And I would love to hear what you see. I want to hear your thoughts, And so use those observations to your advantage and get that feedback, and so it helps you understand what people experience when they walk into your room. And make it useful for you. But I understand your question was about feeling uncomfortable. And I think the thing is practice, anything that feels uncomfortable, practice helps. And it's so, so important. And we're not in alignment with our philosophy if we're not also being observed.
I need you to know that I've been talking so much about that concept just of the things that are scary for us. They stay scary if we don't actually do them, right? And so we so often want to step away from those things. And some things you want to step away from because that's healthy, right? That's why we get scared. Our brains are designed to identify threat, and oftentimes we take that fear and we say, "Oh, well, then I'm not gonna do that," and we don't ever build the skill. It's the same thing with children. Research shows that children who have anxiety, if if a child has anxiety around dogs, if the family always crosses the street and the child doesn't ever have to be near a dog, then the child will continue to be anxious around dogs. So it's actually about scaffolding for the child so they actually have the opportunity to build that skill. Otherwise, they become hothouse flowers and they don't know how to be in the world because anything that's scary we step away from and we don't know how to step towards that discomfort. So I love that as an example for our staff of what something that oftentimes I think it's easy for us to wanna step away from, and really it's a place where we can step into. As you said, we're the experts, and the families know, for the most part, that it's not perfect in there. We do, observation mornings by video, and so we have somebody who goes in with a camera, which has been very, very successful. And they show the classroom, and if there's a like I was leading an observation morning, the children's house child was taking the flashlight and taking it apart and then throwing all the parts on the ground, right? And the family, that's real life, right? He's obviously exploring gravity. We need to find a work where he can watch things fall because that he has a need that work is not meeting. He's not interested in putting together the flashlight right then, right? He's interested in something else. So, um, and we got to talk to them about that. We got to share what we were seeing. We got to share our response. And so I think that when you open yourself up to that, and I've never heard anybody say that if we're going to be observing, we also have to be willing to be observed because that's what we're a coaching community. It's a part of our framework, and it still makes everyone just a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. Not everyone, but some folks. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sort of normalization of observation can go a long way, so it's not something that happens when something's wrong.
mhm.
When somebody maybe there's a concern and all of a sudden you feel compelled to observe. If you are integrating observation into your practice just because you're curious about how to do things differently and because you want to adjust the environment and really meet the needs of the children in there. And like you said, you know, oh, I'm noticing this, and those batteries are heavy and it is kind of a cool noise when it falls down. All right, let's rethink this for this child. So normalizing observation, but it's also just practice. I mean, I remember I spent a summer working at a lab school in Ithaca at Cornell University, and there were these immense two-way mirrors that spanned the length of one wall. And I was very self-conscious at first, thinking, wow, at any time during my day here with the children, there are people who are watching me and listening to me. And the amount of accountability that sort of coded into my teaching practice, I'm so grateful for to this day, because that is the level of accountability we want to have in our teaching practice every day, especially when we're working with 0 to 3 children. We're working with children in the spiritual embryo, in the unconscious absorbent mind. And, part of what's happening developmentally is they're getting these impressions that the best example Montessori talks about is the negative, the film, the camera, where you have these impressions, but if they don't go and get exposed to the chemicals and all of the process of creating an image, they stay sort of latent in the child's mind. And that's an incredible responsibility we have, when we are creating an environment where so many impressions are being created on a daily basis for children. And so we should have a very high level of accountability of what we say and what we do, and making sure that it's not harmful to them now or in the future.
Mhm, mhm. I love that, and I have to tell you, I think it's also in our conversations. I like to operate in my conversations like somebody's videotaping me, especially in hard conversations, so that I am if somebody plays it back and I were
Mm.
to listen to myself, would I be comfortable with, would I be proud of how I'm holding myself? Would I be comfortable with my response? And it's that level of accountability, I think, that grows us
Oh, yeah.
because so many times with 0 to 3, those little people can't go home and report and say, you know, you know, my guide was stern with me today and I ended up feeling sad and they don't have that capacity. So we have it's the stakes are so much higher when we're working with these little people who there's an incredible amount of trust that people have to have in the role and in the character of the people who are working with our youngest citizens. These are our
Mm.
citizens of the world.
Yes, trust and power, that they can't advocate for themselves. And so we have to be so clear on our impact on the room, on the learning environment, and on the children's psychic experience. So, we talk a lot about keeping children physically safe, but it's also about keeping them psychically safe, making sure that we're not damaging with things like shame and punishment and rewards, all of the ways that we accidentally harm children. Being culturally insensitive to a child is harmful.
Mm. Bribing them, all the things, right? All the things. One of the things that the research shows is actually if a child feels dominated, or if we actually even come at them in a way that is not completely in partnership, their fighter, the right, the sympathetic nervous system. This is polyvagal theory, folks. If you haven't heard this before, we have a podcast on it, so just go back and find that podcast. But that they go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and for at least 20 minutes. So they don't have the capacity to learn what you're trying to tell them because we've just really blown the system out. Like, when we, plug too many things in and all of a sudden the electricity doesn't work anymore, their brain can't hold the circuitry when they feel dominated or they have been scolded or reprimanded, and so they can't learn. And so it really takes, they say, about at least 23 minutes for them to reboot to where they can actually take in information. And I have seen with just even in the world and family members and things like that, that it can take longer than that. So I think we also have to be conscious of how are we working with the child in a way that's really preparing them to be able to take in the information. How are we working with their nervous system? Are we seeing their nervous system is in sympathetic? And anyway, that's a whole nother topic. We could we could talk about that all day.
I'm there. I'm there. I mean, well, because it kind of connects to something that you said earlier. We were talking a little bit about risk. And so risk and resilience to me seem really essential in terms of what we're offering as practice in a learning environment for 0 to 3. I think about how education has changed, and even in my lifetime, and then I think about my mom and my grandmother, all of the ways that education has completely changed and morphed, and some of the challenges that we're seeing in education now. And we have so much access to facts. We have a lot of access to getting information, or how to. You want to know how to fix your engine? you can do it. You can watch on YouTube and figure out how to do it. There's pretty much no problem that can't be solved by watching, something on the internet. So then what is education for? So to me, education is about being a actualized human being that can love their community, that can be loved by their community, that has resilience, that can take risks, that can, be mentally healthy. To me, that is the new role of education: mental health,
Mm-hmm.
resolution,
100%. And
repair.
and it probably should have been the role all along. I mean, I understand that we also have to teach math and, there are pieces they need to know how to read and of course that's our responsibility, but that's about supporting the self-construction of the child. It's not about here, let's pour whatever we want into this empty vessel. It's we know that like reading is going to give you access to the world in this amazing way, and for your spirit and for what you are about in the world and what you care about, this is important for you, right? So okay, so I want to shift gears a little bit because I want to make sure we have time to talk about what does it mean to be a tone setter with our families. I love that term and I've never heard that before.
Well, I think that one piece of it is making sure, like we talked a little bit about not being judgmental, but making yourself a resource for a family and a resource that they can feel safe. So you're talking about psychological safety for the child, but it's also for the family. So when I'm building a trusting relationship for the family, that they can ask me questions and know that I'm not going to judge them and that I'm going to hear them out and meet them with warmth and care and compassion. And so I think that part of being a tone setter is understanding as a guide, as a 0 to 3 guide, is that you are just nestling those families under your wings right alongside of the children, and that having the capacity to really to care about them because you know that it's an extension of the work that you're doing with the child. And so that means some level of work. When I talk about, to me, at the infant toddler level, one of the most important courses that we take in training is personal growth. And for reasons that I don't fully understand, the only level that requires that is infant toddler. And so I think about the transformation of the teacher, personal growth is a huge piece of it, so knowing who we are, like, you talk about polyvagal theory and I love it, and understanding the subtleties of communication with another human being. And sometimes it seems, gosh, it's a miracle that we ever understand each other at all, because I'm coming at our conversation with my context, my history, my culture, my language, and then for us to come and meet in the middle and say something meaningful is this beautiful thing that happens. And as we know, it is not easy to do. When we're talking with our families, I think the biggest thing is repeatedly demonstrating that you're invested in their child's success, that you love their child. Ultimately, that's what they want to see. They want to know that their child is loved and met with care and compassion every day. That's what they want. And that the parent can also be met with that is a big one. So taking the time to have conversations, I think that email is generally not great for communicating, unless you've already built a relationship with the person that you're emailing. They can hear your voice in their head, so they understand where you're coming from. But especially in those early days of bringing a new family into the community, it's really important to have those conversations either face to face or on the phone, where they can hear your voice, they can hear your tone. Zoom is kind of great in a way because I can see your face. I can see the expression on your face, and I hear that, I can see that you're listening. I see that you're engaged. And so, Zoom is a tool that we can utilize as well. That I didn't have Zoom when I was first teaching children. There was a phone, that's it.
Right. And you don't know if they're also still doing something else at that time. I love Zoom for that reason.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my question for you. Then talk about what happens when you have a parent who may not be communicating respectfully with you.
Mm. Well, we're talking a lot about partnering with families and control. What can we control? And partnership requires two parties who are both engaged in the process. And so, yes, of course, there are times when a family either isn't interested in partnering, is too busy, has other things happening, it's not what they want. You know, there are some parents that need you more, and then there are some parents that need you less. And so I think that the word control comes into my mind because, again, the thing that we have control over is the environment. That's where we exercise our control. And even that's very indirect through the materials and through the routines. But I think that when you have a family that isn't communicating respectfully, I would want to know more about the situation. Again, that's one of those, it depends. You know, there certainly have been times when I've been working with a family and I know that we're not aligned in our values, that it's okay for your son to wear the sparkle shoes in the environment if he wants to, that is a-okay in our environment. And I heard, from this parent that it was absolutely not okay with the parent. And so when we come to something, I guess the question is when you asked about a family that's communicating respectfully, I would want to know more. I'd want to find out, is this a values thing? Is this a philosophy misalignment? Is this a child development misalignment? So I think it depends on what it's about because sometimes, parents are going to seem defensive because they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling insecure, they're feeling out of their element. And so it depends on why the conversation is feeling disrespectful. And culture comes into play here because what might feel disrespectful to me is not a symbol of disrespect at all for this other person. And so that's again where bias comes into play, where we have to say, all right, I'm noticing I'm feeling kind of disrespected. What's this about? And hopefully they have a relationship with their team or their administrator where they can talk that through. Like I could come to you and say, Tamara, I've been feeling a little bit weird about this family. I feel disrespected. And then I can have you as a mirror to talk through and you can help me reframe if that's what's needed. So sometimes the disrespectful feeling is something that I'm experiencing that isn't even the intent of the family. So first you kind of have to dig into why and then figure out, are there things you can do to start to strengthen the relationship a little bit, invite the family in. I know that you have questions about the philosophy. I know you have questions about what we're doing. You know, I really love offering observations to families who have questions. And again, I set them up. There's some control in the way that I've invited them in. There's the adult size chair. There's the clipboard with the questions. And then of course you meet after and you find out and you talk about it. It's not just done in isolation. So it's about, first of all, identifying. I mean, we talk a lot about identifying the needs of a child, and we're able to see, oh, wow, this child isn't interested in putting it back together. They want to hear the sound of the battery falling. They want to watch the battery falling and experience that. The same thing is true with the families that we're in partnership with, is to identify the need. If there's sometimes it's not what's immediately on the surface and you have to dig a little bit more. And that's going to be more or less comfortable for people depending on, their view or their confidence in relationships.
I I think I completely hear you, and I think you're absolutely right going for the why. And one of the skills that I think is really important for guides and teachers to have is also learning how to really address a family who may not be communicating in a way that is respectful so that it doesn't continue. Because I find people fall in a couple different camps. There's folks who really know how to step into that and they can say, I need you to know this is how that's landing, and I know we're on the same team here. So let's find out what's underneath that for you so that we can really continue to partner. Because when you talk to me like that, I can feel myself shutting down, and I don't want to be shut down. I want to be in this relationship. I want to be connected, right?
Mhm.
So I find there are folks who know how to do that. And then there are those who don't say anything and just become resentful. And when we get resentful with a family, it costs us our well being, it costs the child their well being. We are not as we're not as loving with the family because we become afraid or right, we shut that part of ourselves down. And then there's folks who take it personally and they're angry with the family and they just avoid the family, right? They're not going to address it. So, one of the things I really think is important is that we are actually addressing those pieces in a way that is respectful, just like we would in any partnership. As you were saying, communication is tough, and we are leaders as guides, as teachers. Even if we don't want to be, I often find that folks who are teaching the youngest levels, they're in love with the children, as they should be, and they don't necessarily wanna have those big conversations with families, so that's a part that it can be uncomfortable and they step away from when they have somebody who has a big personality or it feels disrespectful to them. So, that's one of those places that we have some, podcasts actually on Dare to Lead Difficult Conversations. I recommend people check those out. We have Courageous Conversations with Cassie Mackey, a great podcast. So that if that's an area for you that you're struggling, make sure that you're doing the work to build that for yourself and not just stepping away from it. Because there's a cost to our vitality and really our love of the work when we become resentful or upset and we're not stepping into it. They're the only this is and then I'll wrap up, but I find every time there's something that happens, I call it's like poop on the path. And if we don't go clean up the poop on the path, it sits there and it petrifies. And then we always are walking by it. And every time we see the family, we're like, I remember when you did that to me, rather than getting curious and saying, okay, I'm not sure what's going on here. Let's talk about that. The other piece I just want to add is the Greenspring Center has a document that we share with those on our newsletter that is um, a parent-school partnership agreement. And all of our families sign that when they come into the community, saying that they agree to operate with grace and courtesy. And we talk about what that means. It doesn't mean you can't disagree with us. It doesn't mean you can't have difference of opinion. What it does mean is we're going to always talk to you with grace and courtesy and professionalism, and we expect that also in return. We also understand that people have big feelings when it comes to these precious people. We we can give you some room, but you are consistently going to need to be in communication with us in a way that works. And
Mhm.
we found that that is really helpful because it's setting the standard for the family of how we operate as a school community and really makes our staff feel protected and held, because if there's a family who they can't get into that place with, we're actually stepping straight into that conversation with the family saying, this is what we're hearing, this is what we're seeing. Let's talk about this. And how do we get back into alignment?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, there's a big feeling underneath that actually I find, and this is one of the areas I've been working and working and working and working. So I grew up really avoiding emotions completely. Like, if it wasn't happy, if it wasn't positive, I didn't want anything to do with it, right? And so now I have to really, when parents are upset or frustrated, I have to get present to that and be okay in the discomfort and be willing to say, I see that. Let's talk about that rather than just wanting to whip by it and be done with the conversation. And because if you don't go into that piece itself and give them room to talk about it, then they're still stewing on it and they're still holding it. And so that was a lot.
Well, it's very relevant, and I'm glad you said that because it lights something up for me in that number one, what you're describing is a school community that is supporting the teachers. So you're describing as an administrator, if it gets to this point, I'm going to step in and I'm going to make sure that everyone is holding to this agreement that we've made between the school and the family community. So that's a beautiful thing. And I think that's really important. And not everybody has that. Not everybody has that sort of school-wide philosophy of how we're going to treat each other. I think that the other piece of it is, what you described is that, when I'm talking about building relationships with families and when I'm talking about communicating, I want to be careful to say that this isn't about assuming the role of a therapist because we're not therapists, we're teachers. What I am saying is, no, it's not my job as a toddler guide to be the therapist for a parent. It's my job to be exceptionally clear on my own bias, on getting healed with my own early childhood experiences, like you described. This is how I was. I was only going to feel happy or positive, otherwise forget it. We all as adults carry that into our adulthood with us, and it impacts every single relationship that we have. And we're in a profession that is completely dependent on relationships, on the success of the relationships with the children, with the families, and with our teams. It is a very relational work. And yet somehow we're not talking enough, as far as I can see, about the need for us to be really, really clear on our intent and our impact and understand, wow, when I say this to Tamara, I see her face kind of fall, or I see her face light up, or whatever it is that we're that we're tuned in. So it's not to be a therapist for others, but it's to do the work for your own self. So when you're moving through these conversations, you can be pretty clear. Like you said, you know, would I be proud of this if I was being recorded? I think about my future self. If I find myself in a situation that feels crushing, that feels so stressful and scary and all of the things, I do ask myself, what would future Uniit want to have said? What would future Uniit want me to say now? Because I always like to think of myself as getting better with every passing year in my life. I like to think of myself as a more aligned, more integrated, more calm, all of the things person. So I have to assume that 5 years from now, I'm going to be better at being me. What would that person say in this tricky situation I find myself in at work?
Well, once again, you've mentioned something that I've never heard before. I love that. I think that's such a great tool. Like, it's actually like you're pushing yourself to evolve in the moment into who you want to be. And that's the work, folks. I mean, that's what we all know. It's part of, I think, why we're drawn to Montessori. You and I talked about that on your last podcast, Uniit, about how we're drawn to this work because part of it is a healing work for us. And we are called to be who we came to the planet to be rather than kind of who we default into because of our life experiences. So I love that of really consistently asking yourself to step step into your advanced growth, if that
Yeah,
makes sense,
yeah,
right?
yes. And in Montessori terms, figuring out what our cosmic task is. Like we talk about cosmic task at the elementary level, but I like to talk about our cosmic task at the 0 to 3 level because it's about, we're as the guide, the adult, the prepared adult in the room for a 0 to 3 environment, we our cosmic task is to get to that point where we're really clear. I think of it like a prism. When it's a clear prism, that rainbow goes right through and reflects out to the other side. And that's how I think about us as toddler guides, because If it's smudged or obstructed, then you don't get the rainbow. And so I think about, what do I need to do to be sure that I understand how my bias is impacting this relationship that I'm building with a child? I mean, you think about groups of children, and one is, let's say, easier for you to work with and connect with, and one is more challenging for you to connect with and work with. And the same is true about parents. And to me, all of that falls under the umbrella of humaning. And so figuring out, well, why do I feel challenged by this child or this parent? Why do I feel especially warm and fuzzy toward this child or toward this parent? And we're simple creatures in many ways, and it often has to do with us either recognizing something familiar in this other person or something that we wish for ourselves. So the only thing that we can do, that we have control over, is figuring ourselves out so we can be more prepared guides in the environment. We don't have control over how the other person responds to us. We can set limits and we can set expectations, and how beautiful to have an administrator who is going to hold that line on our behalf, because, as an infant toddler teacher, we have less influence than, say, a school administrator does. And so that's another piece of power that can be really used to create a very, like you talk about, communities of belonging. And to me, that strikes me as an important piece of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we have to wrap up here pretty quick, but I do want to just share that, as you know, our mentoring communities are doing research this year, and our new guides are having the experience. They're filling out forms and surveys throughout the year so we can see what impact mentoring is making, which it is making a significant difference in efficacy, which is so exciting. And the feedback that we weren't expecting is that the challenges that these new, most of them are new to the role, are really experiencing are with their administration. And it's the administrations that are making their job feel so hard or undoable. Now, not all the administrations, and of course, but and what really strikes me is that these administrators, like me, are all people who are deeply committed to children. Not, of course, not everyone all the time, but mostly these are people who love children, love Montessori, love schools, care about education, care about the future of the world, and are giving blood, sweat, and tears to these school communities, and yet there's still this disconnect. And that's part of our big work at the center. It's part of why we have a workshop on the culture of belonging that we bring out to schools and offer, is because that that cost is so significant, and it really comes out of administrators not knowing how to build a culture of belonging. They don't know how. So they're doing all this work, and how would they have that skill set? How would they know that? There's no way to know it unless you do all the deep dive in the research. And who has time, right? The only reason I did that work is because I really got called to the mat and called out, and I had to take my Saturdays and read and learn and go to workshops and really understand what wasn't working. And so I think that's an area that we are really finding that schools need real support, and there's a real need. So it has been absolutely delightful to have you on again. You are just, I know you have wisdom, 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 always dropping the wisdom you need. And it's such a pleasure to get to talk to you. You're talking about the spiritual preparation in the adult, holding the parent and the families as really with the same love that we hold those children with. How do we build these relationships? How do we tend to them? How do we individuate? All of those things are embedded here. And I'm just so profoundly grateful that you're one of our mentors for the 24-25 school year for our infant program, and that you're doing this work for people. Just so fabulous. Now, you are also a singer-songwriter.
Yeah, I am.
we are going to give you all a special treat because Uniit has written a song called My Boy Has Wings. It just even the title makes me a little teary. And we're going to try to share it with y'all here today. So, does that sound good, Uniit? Are you
Great. I would love to sing to you.
That would be fabulous. That would be fabulous.
Blue skies and palm trees, how far you fly from me. Do you remember home? Brown eyes and shaggy hair, I still see the boy in there. I still see the baby you once were. I wish for you the world itself, touched to the bottom of the well. And when joy can't hold you, sorrow will wash and fold you. Swim up, my love, don't stay too long. A broken looking glass, no sense in getting upset. I knew we had to crash. I watched you reach for light, skipped walking right to flight. Now you can't fall in love with the life you make. I wish for you the world itself, touched to the bottom of the well. And when joy can't hold you, sorrow will wash up, fold you. Swim up, my love, don't stay too long. When doubts come whispering in, don't listen, don't believe them. Look up, my love, my boy has wings. Look up, my love, my boy has wings. Look up, my love.
That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
That was so beautiful, Uniit. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that beautiful part of yourself with us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. I love being with you, and I'm so excited about all this awesome work Greenspring is doing and grateful to be part of it.
Oh, we're grateful. We're grateful to be co-creating this new frontier with you. Thank you for being a part of it. Um, so we're going to sign off now. I just want to say thank you for spending your time with us today. We so appreciate you. And to our listeners, thank you for spending your time with us today. Take a look at our website, greenspringcenter.org, to view the show notes from today's episode. A link to Uniit's website is included on the show notes page of our website. We can also include, if it's okay with you, Uniit, the observation form that you referenced. Would you be willing to share that?
Of course, I'd be happy to.
That would be great. And then we will also include a link to the Polyvagal podcast and to the Courageous Conversations podcast and the Dare to Lead podcast for those of you who are interested in, so you don't have to dig for those. And then also, and you can tell us if this works for you, Uniit, but would you like to put a link to your song?
Yes, it's there. I have other songs I can link to. That one hasn't been officially recorded yet, so I will keep you posted on that. But certainly, people can find me singing if they wish to.
Yeah, let's share a couple of those. That would be fabulous, right?
Okay.
We would love that. So, and listeners, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast to hear the latest episodes and join in the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. The work you do is so important. I think it's the most important work that there is, and our work is creating peace on this planet. Thank you for everything that you are doing, and join us next time.